Welcome back to Roots and Relevance. We are in the middle of a series that we are calling Threads of Redemption, and we're I think right in the middle of the series. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 7 today, and just if you haven't listened to previous episodes, each one is a standalone, but it's an amazing thing. We have probably the best recap person I've ever met in my life. Just you can just ask him in a second, hey, just do a recap. And it's almost like you ask a chat bot. We call it
Mr. Cliff Note.
Jonathan GPT. Jonathan, in 60 seconds, where have we been?
Well, we started with Genesis 1, and then we started with the original covenant, and then we moved through the broken covenant, and then we moved to the reestablished covenant with Abraham. And then we saw how God was faithful to his covenant in Egypt with letting his people go to worship him. And now we're going to get to David, King David, and God reestablishing his covenant with David and his heirs.
This recap has been brought to you by...
Good job. That's why they pay him the big bucks.
That's why, exactly. Well, I just wish there was something in the news to talk about. It's kind of hard to do a podcast and not talk about not just what happened a couple weeks ago, but the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And
can I stop there?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I did. I have not done research on this, so I just want to know, because Charlie Kirk's situation, at least in real time, now, if someone's listening to this in 3 years... there would have been so many more world problems and issues and going on. But what's the difference between a murder and assassination?
Politics.
All right, so it has to be political. So if you're political and you're murdered because of your political views, we call that an assassination.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll have to, that's probably the best definition I've heard.
I mean, when you call it an assassination, there's some kind of political aspect of it that makes it rise. I don't know if it makes it rise to that level. Or, is assassination worse than a murder? I mean, it's still a killing of a life,
Well, no, we're elevating this word assassination. So, if a pastor is standing up preaching God's gospel to the people and he's killed for that, is that an assassination? Or is that a murder?
Or is that a martyr?
Or is that a hate crime?
I mean, not to make light of this, but because it is important how we define these things, right? Same thing with political violence.
Yep.
That's a term that's getting thrown around a lot. But if you actually dig a little bit, people have very different definitions of political violence, depending actually on which side of the political aisle that you're on. And so I think those definitions are important, regardless of what you call it. On Sunday, this past Sunday, there was a packed out football stadium. I forget, 65,000?
They said
95,000 people packed into a football stadium for, and maybe we can argue over this too. I'm not sure if you call it, I guess it was a memorial service, right? It wasn't a funeral.
No, it was a memorial.
A memorial service.
Yeah. Or political rally, however you want to frame that.
There have been a lot of hot takes on this, so we need one more. But I thought, and David French in his article in the New York Times hit on this kind of juxtaposition. And when I saw this, I'm like, oh man, this is really the heart of what we're talking about. Two things happened in the service, but I think the most powerful moment came from Erica Kirk. And I'll just read to you what she said in this moment where you could have heard a pin drop. Talking about the shooter, I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do, she said. The answer to hate is not hate, channeling some Martin Luther King Jr. there. The answer we know from the gospel is love and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us. I mean, you want to talk about a tangible representation of the gospel.
I was going to say, that's a very biblical take on what she did
and
why she did it.
I'm not going to completely agree with y'all's estimations, but we're going to move on.
Okay, well,
I want to say that y'all said that, I didn't say that.
You may have a chance to unpack that, because let me just show you what happened subsequently after this, because this is really not gospel.
No.
Okay. What you're about to hear is not gospel.
Anti-gospel.
And that's, if it creates cognitive dissonance in you, that's kind of the point. So one quote got more coverage than the other, and that was what Trump said. He goes, talking about Charlie, he did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Erica. That one got a lot of coverage. What got less coverage is Stephen Miller, moments after Kirk had demonstrated the gospel, had a different message for enemies. So here's what he said. Addressing those, he said, we're trying to, quote, foment hatred against us, he said. You are nothing. He's saying this he's like shouting this. You are nothing. You are wickedness. You are jealousy. You are envy. You are hatred. You are nothing, he repeated. You can build nothing. You can produce nothing. You can create nothing. We are the ones who build. And French says this about that. He said, particularly disturbing was the crescendo as Miller repeatedly declared other people, human beings, whose lives are every bit as precious as those of every person in that stadium, to be nothing. What comes up for you as you hear that?
Okay. Oh, I got plenty. Oh, this is so much fun. So this is the perfect example of what we've been talking about for months, if not a year now, on this podcast. You know, at one point we talked about whether the 10 Commandments should be in the classroom, shouldn't be in the classroom, and what's wrong with that, and why can't we have prayer, why can't we have Bible readings, and we kind of had a huge discussion about that last fall, I think. And then here's the perfect example. My wife Rachel has been following this whole I don't know how to even say it, this Charlie Kirk. Well, it's this Charlie Kirk post-death spectacle in a way, and it's a sad thing is, as I think many people have noted, where are his parents? What are they doing? Where's his sister? They were mentioned 2 times each in this whole thing on Sunday. And it's like, there's so much sadness, and including for Erica, I'm sure she's still in shock, but this is what we talk about when you put together the gospel, what Yahweh and Christ came to bring us of good news, of love and forgiving and non-hatred, and you overlay it and you marry it with nationalistic views and nationalistic wants and desires. You have politicians standing up there for obvious reasons. You're not going to blame.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying it's not good, and I don't think the government should do it. But in present-day politics across the world, I wouldn't expect anything less for Trump to say what he said and Miller to say what he said. But the problem is you marry the two in the same stage, in the same venue, where you got someone literally carrying a cross on wheels, by the way, which said, I guess they need training wheels. But you're carrying the cross on wheels, and you've got Erica saying all this, and then you get Trump going up there and saying the absolute antithesis to what Christ came to bring. This is what you get when you cross the two. Podcast listener, you have to keep them separate.
Yeah, I think it was Tim Keller. It could have been somebody else, but I heard Tim Keller say, when you mix politics and religion, you get politics.
Yeah.
And I've actually quoted that a lot, but I would actually have a slightly different take. I actually think when you mix politics and religion, you get something, and Jonathan, you said it, and that's what triggered this in my mind. I think you do get something different, like fundamentally different. And it's ugly,
and it's destructive. And it's destructive to religion. It's never destructive to politics.
You've got a non-gospel Christian nationalistic view of life and of your nation and of your neighbor. That's what you get, and it's not healthy, and it's not what Yahweh came to bring.
Tim Alberta wrote a book, "The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory," something like that, and he does sort of this history of what can happen in religion, and he actually uses Russia as an example of how there was like a legitimate church in Russia that was very like faith oriented, but how it began to transition into state religion, and how it was still powerful, but it was something very different where it kind of meshed those two together. And his warning was kind of like, hey, we have to make sure that that's not happening here. And that when I see some of those things happen, that's where I get nervous and going, man, there was so much good stuff. There was worship, there was forgiveness of enemies, and then this, and it just, to me, it hurts. It hurts to see those two things being put one after the other. And how confusing, by the way, if you're not a Christian and you're watching and you're tuning into this and you're seeing this display of forgiveness that just probably chokes you up in tears. And then 2 minutes later, So here's the other piece. The Stephen Miller quote was troubling, but that's not what troubled me the most. That's what Stephen Miller does. What was troubling was the crowd's reaction of hooting and hollering and cheering him on as he crescendos, "You are nothing, you have nothing."
As they were just lifting their hands in worship of Jesus like moments before, then all of a sudden they're cheering this hate-filled speech.
100%.
Because guys, this is what's gone on in the church, not in the church, but in the church globally, of what we did. We've always separated what there is of sacredness of God and what there is of secular, how we run our country. French did this in his article that you sent us. It's like we get the Romans 13, the government has its job, and we're going to kind of exclude them from the gospel and the requirements of love and Yahweh. And then we've got everybody else that we expect this individual forgiveness, this individual grace that we're supposed to give. And it's just hogwash, and I mean, there is justice that we all have to go by. But I just think when you marry the two on a stage, when you get Cody Carnes up there and Brandon Lake up there and, whoever else, and you're singing all these songs, and you got Trump up there spewing out this anti-gospel message, this is why you don't do this. And this is why it's destructive for many people who are already questioning who God really is in the first place. And you're like, if that's God, I don't want that God. I already have that God out in
But haven't we experienced this reality since the 3rd or 4th century, since Constantine?
Oh, yeah.
And politics and government and religion sort of overlapping itself. And I would argue that the essential nature of Christianity changed with the official adoption of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman
And what
government.
would you say the primary difference was when Constantine kind of took over and took charge? Because I think most people would agree that a fundamental difference happened and most of it was bad.
Well,
what was the difference?
Well, we see it very early on in the Council of Nicaea, right? Who called the council? Constantine. What was he? He was the one that's going to deal with the heresy of Arianism that was happening in his purview of his power,
right,
in his governing area, that he was going to settle it.
And it turned into state religion, basically, at that point.
You're going to see it today in the scripture. We're at the end of this whole, God not wanting to call a king, and the people wanted a king. And then what you see with Saul, the first king, is he's using all of these personal desires and personal wants and standing in the way of what Yahweh has required of him. And when David, we're going to see the same thing, less of it. But we're seeing the same exact thing, that when you put a political person, remember what a political means. We think of it as Republican and Democrat and
People
Independent
of the city,
and Green
right?
Party.
It has to do with the city.
It just means those people that are elected or are honored to represent the people. That's all the politics are. And ultimately, it's us. And that's what Yahweh first did not want. He did not want anyone in between him and God. I mean, we've all failed that. Constantine was, kind of started that, but it's gone on and on and on today. And so whenever you put a man or a woman in front of God, this is what you're going to get. But when you take it to its end, you got what you got on Sunday at that service.
Yeah.
It's just you can't unwind the two. And it's like, how do I pick apart what is of the gospel and what is not? And I'll say, if it's 95% of gospel and it's 5% not, then it's not the gospel. You can't have anything that's not gospel and call it something that's religious and beautiful and nice. It's still wrong.
It is unbiblical you to look at a brother and sister in Christ and say you cannot be a Christian and be a part of that certain political party.
Right.
That is unbiblical, ungodly, and anti-Christ.
Well, and
in the lowercase a and not the capital A.
To both your points, one of the questions, if it was 95% gospel and 5% mixed, and therefore not the gospel, I've also seen articles that have talked about how many people have come to Christ out of that memorial service. And my question is, what are they being saved to? My prayer is that they're saved to Jesus and the other stuff fades away. But it might look like that if there's an altar call happening in that environment, that you're being baptized into a faith that is very political as well. Like you're being baptized into the Republican Party.
Well, all the studies have shown, all the tentative anecdotes have shown that, church attendance went up. You see all these people on TikTok or Instagram or X. You say, I hadn't been to church in X number of years, or I've never been to church, and I went to church. And And they'll say that I went to church because of what I saw on that screen at the Charlie Kirk thing, and or I went to church because of Charlie.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I heard that a lot
too. Yep.
Which I prayed that people came to church because of the relationship that I had with them, and when they came to church, they heard the gospel and believed the beauty of the good news of Jesus Christ, and they became a follower of Christ. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I'm going to make a little joke here, but it's in all seriousness. It's all seriousness.
A statutory joke,
and this is what.
Okay.
No. So as you're going down this stadium, and you're walking past the hats and the shirt shop, and then you're going past the TFUSA sign-up box, TP whatever, and then you're going to go by the voting registration, and then you're going to go by you can have Jesus today if you sign this card. How do you know what's different? Is it all the same if you join TPUSA and you vote Republican, or you register to vote Republican, and then you go buy a hat that says Charlie Kirk's the best, and then you go and say, I want Jesus because this guy martyred for Jesus? This is the anomaly of this is not the gospel. This is so... I'm getting ramped up. I don't ever get
never.
Go
He's
ahead.
Never gotten
Get ramped
so,
up. Get angry. Come on. Vent.
Which Christ did they accept? Which Christ did they bow to? And I don't know. I didn't watch the service. I've only heard the snippets and probably the ones that I shouldn't have listened to. But I don't know what Christ they would have heard, because if they heard the Christ from Cody Carnes or Erica Kirk in that one little snippet, it's not the best, because she compared the martyrdom of Christ and Charlie Kirk together, and I don't know that you can do that.
Yikes. Yeah.
I mean, he did. I mean, she literally said just like, whatever he said, it's like Charlie and Christ are the same, and like, no. What Charlie Kirk was doing, what I've seen, it was not what Christ was doing. And so I say, when we put all this together, podcast listener, you can't put the two together. You can vote Republican and still be a Christian. You can vote Democrat and still be a Christian. But what you can't do is put them on the stage together and hug and hold hands and put their hands in the air and say, this is who Christ is, because it's not.
Totally. And I know I've said this many, many times, but it just bears reminding that if there's nothing in your political platform that your Christian faith does not disagree with, then you actually have to believe that somehow a secular platform institution happens to lined up exactly perfectly with your kingdom values. And that should cause a check in your spirit.
But I was going to say that then it starts, you're starting to see in those political platforms a reflection of yourself, not of the gospel.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
You're not seeing the kingdom in that. You're seeing yourself in what you want the kingdom to be.
100%. And if you're listening to this, one of the things I want us to think about is just how polarized of an environment we're in right now. That's the sort of environment that we're living in instead of one where you can actually talk with nuance and hopefully with grace to understand another person.
Well, and I'd like to think that this, would be a sole case of where you see the merging of religion and politics. But man, I went to the very first SEND conference, which is a North American Mission Board.
That's SEND, not SEND conference.
Yeah,
that was like 3 weeks later, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, that happened on Lower Broad like 3 hours later.
So seems like I go there 2 or 3 times a week, but go ahead.
But in 2015 was the very first SEND conference put on by the North American Mission Board by the Southern Baptist Convention. And it was supposed to be something that was supposed to catalyze and mobilize people for North American missions. And in the middle of this conference, we had Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio on the screen, because it was the 2016, this is before Trump was the sole candidate. This is when Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio were running. And they were doing their political spiel to this conference, which was about the gospel.
I was there.
Were you there? Did you remember this?
Oh, I very much remember
and
this.
I said, we've lost our way.
Yep.
We've lost our way.
I was at the other SEND conference, the SIM.
I mean, did you feel that was just like the proverbial blank in the punch bowl?
It was a punch in the gut. And just to be clear, had they been Democrat candidates or independent candidates, I would have felt the exact same way. And Jonathan, you alluded to this earlier, is that when you look at Scripture, you see that man has a way about things that is often about power, and it's about the external, and God comes in and says, that's actually not what I'm going to do. And I think the passage today is a very vivid illustration of that in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And so we're going to talk about David and the Davidic covenant as an extension of the Abrahamic covenant and what that means for us going forward as well. And so I'll start off. I'll read the first 7 verses and then love to hear from you guys, like what comes up for you out of these 7 verses that are kind of key to what we're talking about. This is the NIV. It says, "After the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, 'Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent.' Nathan replied to the king, 'Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you.' But that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, 'Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt in this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Whenever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" What is happening? Lots of houses of cedar.
Is David flexing here?
I don't think so. I think he wakes up with really good intentions. I think he feels bad. And maybe if this were somebody else, I wouldn't have said that. But here, I think David really is. It's like, why am I up in the palace and God's down there in a curtain? He's Yahweh and I'm not. I'm just his representative, his image here before the people.
David has defeated Saul. All the tribes are now united. He's come to Jerusalem now. And the ark has been in a different place,
right,
for years. Right? Initially he was bringing it up, and then the cart tipped over, and these 2 guys put their hands on the ark, and God broke out against them, and they died. And he said, "I ain't bringing it to Jerusalem. We'll just leave it over here at this guy's house." And so they brought the ark into Jerusalem. There's been this big celebration, and now he's what am I supposed to do with this? You know?
Yeah, I think it's not so obvious as well for those reasons, right? He had victory after victory. I mean, it was like he couldn't. People were getting so sick of winning from David. And think about the ancient Near Eastern context. In that context, the surrounding areas, it was very, very normal for a successful monarch, once they consolidate power, to then create a temple for their deity. It wasn't just religious. By the way, this is like totally weird. Am I right? It was this mix of religious and political like strength. Like, in other words, if I build a temple and it is beautiful to my God, then yeah, that's great. And I think David's motivations for the most part were probably good and right. But could it be that mixed in here is also, hey, this is what everybody else in the area does, and we're going to, oh, you did your military parade? We'll watch. This is our military
Or
parade.
even more subtly, that you equate the God to the king. That somehow he builds the temple for the God, and this is his God. Well, unless you're Egypt, and then you just get to claim deity.
Right.
Right. You're building temples to yourself, because you're God.
Totally.
Go ahead,
I
Jonathan.
think, no, I mean, I'm not going to disagree necessarily, but I think you have Nathan. You have Nathan who's been along the way here, called out David for Bathsheba, and you got Nathan agreeing with David.
Yeah, but he was wrong.
In verse 3. He's like, well, no. I agree that they were wrong. And I think if anything they were wrong about was not bad intentions on my part, they just didn't seek out God's direction.
Yeah, I think
first.
that's for me the big problem in this story is Nathan, right? He's supposed to be the prophet that's not predicting the future, but
Truth-telling.
forthtelling.
Yeah.
That you're speaking in place of God for this situation, and he doesn't, like Jonathan said, he doesn't even seek God's face and purpose in this.
But it wasn't a big deal for a prophet in that time to be wrong, was it?
Well, just be careful, men with stones come after you. Right?
Exactly. Clouds, start going over his head. It is an interesting question years later. In Jeremiah 22:14, 15, he mocks Jehoiakim for saying, quote, "I will build myself a great house with spacious upper rooms. It is paneled with cedar and painted with vermilion." Then Jeremiah asks, "Do you think you are a king because you compete in cedar?" And so the prophets later on went back and actually critiqued, cedar, the cedars of Lebanon. That would have been like very luxurious and the finest. In other words, David was living in a house like of luxury. And to your point earlier, I do wonder if he's getting comfortable and he's had all these victories. And then, like Jonathan said, at the same time, he's seeing all this that he has, and he looks at his God, and he's in a tent, and he's like, nope, that's not right. And so I think all those things could possibly get mixed in there. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think the big thoughts of what we just talked about with relevance, it's, I think God's response, and you're going to see it again near the end of this section that we're going to be reading out of 2 Samuel 7, is that I don't need you. I've got this.
Yeah.
If I want a house, I'll build me a house, and I'm going to have me a house. But I think the house, maybe he's not talking about Solomon's temple here or the second temple, but I'm thinking it's the Revelation 21-22 temple. It's like, eventually I will build me a house, and that house will be perfect and will be beautiful. I appreciate the thought, but I've got this. And the same thing's going on today. We don't need the Republican Party to create a Christian nation for God, because Yahweh's got this. And I think historically, Timmy has said this plenty of times, historically, that it always works better when we don't have a Christian nation. It comes from the ground, grassroots. It comes from the people. It comes from the humility. It comes from those types of folks, and it's not power over from the government.
It's a different politic altogether.
Well, we see the sentiment, right, that God tells Nathan, says, listen, I'm not in need. I don't need a place to lay my head or to find a resting place. I'm okay, at least not on David's initiative. I get to initiate how, like we talked about last week with Anna, that God determines the method and the ways and the means by which you're to approach him.
And he's free to do what he wants. Like, I saw some commentators talk about how this could be looked at as almost like a way to domesticate God and put him in a literal box. And God's like, no. In fact, in case you didn't remember, I've been good for a very long time without a house. I don't know where you're getting this house idea.
And Paul picks up this language in Acts 17 where he says the God who made the world and everything in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by men.
Yeah.
He's not in need, and David's not filling a need that God lacks anything or is in need of something. And God is just reminding him, no, I'm God. I don't need anything.
When I read it this week, I actually thought about Jesus himself. I may be getting this verse a little bit wrong, but the gist of it was foxes have holes and wolves have den, but nowhere does the Son of Man have a place to lay his head. And I was like, oh man, Jesus was kind of the same thing. He's like, you know what? I don't have a stable house. I'm going from place to place, but I'm free to do that. And so I think that dialogue is interesting. And the other thing, before we jump to the next section, that I think is really important is the word for house, that David is offering to build him a house. And the Hebrew word is it bayith, B-A-Y-I-T-H, or bayit. And there's a word play that happens here because that word house is repeated multiple times in this passage. And David is meaning it one way. He's probably thinking, he's thinking golden ballroom, right? The cedar, he's thinking big here. God, as we see, is going to kind of flip that on its head. So let's read that. Who has verses 8 through 17?
I'll read 8 through 17.
Go for it.
I'm reading from the ESV.
Okay.
Now, therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be a prince over my people, Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place, and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. Verse 13. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, and with stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you, and your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and in accordance with all the vision Nathan spoke to David.
Okay, what is happening here? That's a lot, but like what is God's response and what is he doing here with David?
I mean, I think to go to what this whole series is about, which is threads of redemption with all the little sheep running around the vines. It looks like the vines are attacking the sheep, by the way. I love
Whoops.
it in the intro. But anyway, I think it's a beautiful statement what Yahweh has told Nathan to report to David, and that is, I've got this, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed since Genesis 1 with what I gave Adam and Eve to do in the garden. This is nothing different than what I've given, Isaac, Jacob, and, nothing different than what I've given Moses to do, and all the prophets and all the judges. This has always been the kingdom that I will establish. This will be the house that I will establish. These were the enemies that I will defeat for you. This will be the land that I will give to you. This is not in your hands to mess up, because you will mess it up. This is in my hands, and that is something that you can trust in. I mean, I think that's the last part of that was, your house and kingdom will endure before me forever, and your throne will be established forever. This is all about Yahweh and always has been. And when we get so big and powerful because we're winning and we're winning and we're winning, it's always hard to second guess a winner until they don't win anymore.
Yeah.
And David's not going to win here soon.
I mean, what a flip, right? Because David goes to God. He's sitting in his house of cedar and says, okay, my God is in a tent. And he goes to God and says, okay, I'm going to build you a house, meaning in David's mind, a permanent house, a structure. And God comes back to David and says, no, actually, you're not going to build me anything. I'm going to build you a house, right? And then that's the play on words, same Hebrew word, but this time he doesn't mean a structure. He's talking about a dynasty. He's talking about a family that in a rule that's going to be established forever.
A legacy.
Yeah. There's so many implications there.
I find the play on house and house very interesting. It reminds me of what we talked about last podcast with Anna about the call of 2 weeks ago when we talked about, or 2 podcasts ago when we talked about the call of Abram.
Right.
Where Abram,
which lots of Abram language in this passage.
Absolutely. So Abram is a man that chooses to marry a barren woman that can never produce an heir, that could never carry on his name or the family name. But God says, hey, I'm going to make your name great.
Right.
This is sort of indicative and reminds me of that. And it should hearken readers back to that incident with Abram and the initial call of Abram and the covenant that God is making with Abram, that it is through you the whole world is going to be blessed. And so now we see this fulfilled in the line of David, or we'll see later on in the Old Testament prophets, the root of Jesse.
Right. The Abrahamic covenant being, it was one-sided, right? In other words, we talked a lot about that, about how even with the blood path, it was weird. God did it in a very strange way. He did it that it was all on him and not on Moses at all. The Mosaic covenant is a little bit different, right? You're going to be blessed if you do this. You're going to have curses if you do this. And then you have the Davidic covenant. And my question is, and this has actually been a difference that different commentators have had, is this unconditional as well, like the Abrahamic covenant? Or is it something different? Because it also has in it, hey, I'm going to discipline you if you do these things, right? And so, yeah, what are your thoughts? Is this unconditional covenant, a conditional covenant? Because it does mirror Abraham in so many ways.
Well, I think it's kind of what we talked about earlier about this Christian nationalism. What is the covenant anyway? Is this a covenant with man? So if it's a covenant with man that man had nothing to do with, and even though there are contingencies, are those contingencies for God's ultimate redemption of all people? Or is this contingencies to a specific group of people, but his redemption will eventually come based on what he has done and what he has given us, which is ultimately going to be Christ. And so I think that's something that I'd like to parse out. And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm saying, we see plenty of kings and we see plenty of people get punished and killed. Moses gets rejected and from coming into the promised land because of certain things he did. And Saul gets pulled away from being kingship because of some of the things he did. David's going to have similar things. Solomon's going to have his nation, his kingdom torn apart into two after his death. So, when we see that the beating and the discipline is for a definite period of time, that they will be disciplined, but ultimately God's ultimate covenant will always be fulfilled because it's always in
So
his
your
hands.
argument is then that the promises of the covenant are more broad and universal. The discipline piece is more particular to the group, which, by the way, that's the way that like we should want it to be. Can you imagine being the opposite of actually, no, the punishment is for everybody, but there's the select group.
Yeah, you bring a good point up, and so I want to clarify. So I'm not saying there's not consequences to sin. We see that in Genesis 3 when they get kicked out of
Sure.
the garden, out of God's, we said presence, but he's exiled from his full access. So what I think is that God's covenant, that his ultimate blessing will come to all, but it will be through his act, through the Mashiach being killed and tortured and dying, and then, of course, being resurrected. It will be through his act, not through the act of a man.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, they will receive discipline. And, of course, Christ
And
receives
you
discipline.
mentioned Jonathan, but like actually, it's interesting because this does distinguish a little bit from Saul in verse 15. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And so there is a distinction, and I would also say like the discipline piece is interesting to me because if you look, it's discipline in the context of family. Like I will be his father and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I'll punish him with a rod wielded by men. So that's not this like, I'm going to punish him because I'm powerful and I can. That's like, he's my son. I'm going to discipline like I would anybody that I loved.
Let me ask you, smart folks, who is 14? Who is he talking about, Wally?
Is he talking about Solomon? Is he talking about the future line of kings, or is this anticipating Christ? Is this anticipating his anointed one, the one that's fulfilling
Yes.
the promises of Abraham and the promises to be a prophet like Moses that hasn't appeared yet? And it's supposed to, is this going to be the priestly ruling kingship, prophet, priest, and king fulfilled in one person? And is this what he's talking about here? Or is it talking about just the future line of kings that have come from David?
I think this is exactly why you have to look at where we've been in the whole series of Threads of Redemption and where we are right now, right? Because the way this is being written is it's clearly continuing. Hey, remember the Abrahamic covenant? Let's keep talking about this. It's almost like a grown-up Southern Baptist. It's like it's rededication. You do it like 12 times. This is like the rededication
If
time.
you're really serious, you get rebaptized three times.
Is this second virginity?
Please let's not go there. That just brings up horrible youth ministry.
Thank you for
things.
giving me a good
Yes.
podcast clip to get on Instagram. That's
Oh my
Instagram worthy.
gosh. PTSD.
But no, I think we are meant to look at the line, and I think we are meant to go, okay, they would have certainly seen Solomon, right? Like when they read this. And you couldn't say it's just Jesus because it talks about when he sins, what do you do with it? But it's for sure like looking forward to a future king that is different. And that's not Solomon. As we know, that's Jesus. So I think the answer is yes. I think it's all that. Jonathan, how am I wrong?
If we go back to that, David was an image of God, but he was kind of a specific image of God in this case, because he was the one between him and the Israelite people. I think whenever he mentions, it's always been a problem for me in Abraham 12:15. Genesis 12:15 with Abraham and with David here. It's like, I'm going to make your name great. Well, that's just kind of like opposite of what we would expect. The Messiah was never going to have a great name. He was always going to be going to the poor. He's going to be the suffering servant. And all of a sudden, here Yahweh's telling Nathan, go tell David, I'm going to make his name great. So to me, the only way that I can reconcile that in my mind is that when he's saying David and Abraham, I'm going to make your name great, your name's going to be great only because you're my representative. Your greatness will only come because of that and not because of anything you are or anything that you do for the people. Your name will be great because I'm going to make your name great because you will be my image and you are reflecting
Has David's name been made great?
There's an Amazon show right now that says yes.
and I find it interesting, and I've been trying to do some research on this word. In verse 9, it says, and I will make for you a great name like the name of the great ones of the earth. and that's that the word great ones is gadolim,
Right.
and it sounds very familiar to Giddalim, the mighty ones, the giants,
The Nephilim.
the Nephilim. And it's not the same word, but it sounds a lot like that. You know, that I'm going to make your name like the great ones
Like
of the
the
earth.
Nephilim. Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, you want to give us a 30-second theology of Nephilim? I'm kidding. We're not even going to go there.
I've been studying.
So the
I've been
Nephilim,
listening to this.
just like in Genesis 1 and 2. You know, I made it only because Tim Mackey kind of put that seed in my head that, you know, maybe the Elohim were coming up and down into the garden, not necessarily to bring chaos, but maybe they were having that. But Wally, don't you believe that the Elohim were coming down to earth?
Tim Mackey,
Elohim being what? Remind us.
the rulers of above.
The little
G.
Elohim,
Yes,
Elohim.
yes, not the Elohim.
That means just
Gods,
the heavenly
spiritual
host.
beings.
yeah.
Well, God was coming up and down too, but yes.
No, I mean,
but
I
interacting.
mean that word is in Hebrew is gods, like little G O D S.
Yes.
Right.
Little G-O-D-S.
So this is I read it for the first time. You know, I usually just breeze through this passage, getting to, well, I'm going to make with you an everlasting covenant. You know, I'll never let my love depart from you, and things like. But I'm trying to reconcile what is it. What does he mean that I'm going to make your name great, like the great ones of the earth? That like the great ones would be the ones of political power and might and reputation and mythology, right? I mean, is that how you would see the great ones in this time frame?
Well, you do also have to, in ancient Near Eastern culture, when you think about that word house as dynasty, that was what it meant for your name to be great. In other words, your bloodline was not going to end. It's going to keep going forever. So could it have connotations of gold and planks of cedar and all that? Sure. But I do wonder if that's not instead talking about like the family line being great and continuing and fulfilling in Jesus himself, you know, with who constitutes a new family for us.
Yeah, but I like the great ones of the earth. That's
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm just still trying to process that phrase. I don't have an answer for it, and I'm doing some research on it, but I still can't process what that means.
The importance of figuring out like what does it mean to be great? What does it mean for your name to be great? Is kind of what we've opened up talking about is our methods versus God's methods. And just kind of taking a step back, what do you think it says that David comes to God and says, hey, I want to make you a literal house that's going to totally reflect who you are. And God's like, no. Actually, I'm going to build you a house. What theologically, what should a listener in 2025 or in 2028, if they're still listening, what would they hear? What's to take out of the way that God works as in contrast to the way that like David initially came? That's our instinct, I think.
Well, like you said, verse 18 in his first line of his prayer says, "Who am I, O Lord, and what is my house that you have brought me thus far? And yet this was no small thing in your eyes, O Lord your God." I mean, I think he just respond with, "Oh, this is grace." Right?
Yeah.
This is undeserved favor. It's nothing that David has done. You know, God's the one that's provided all the victories. God's the one that's provided him the opportunity to be king. God's the one that's chosen him. God's the one that's helped him prevail. God's the one who's overcome all his enemies.
And he reminds him of that. He goes,
Yes.
hey, in case you forgot, I plucked you out of the pasture, which was like you were working in the sewer, basically.
From following sheep. I'm just trying to figure out that following sheep. I know that, you know, shepherds work from behind with their voice and things like that, but there's an image that the sheep was almost leading him.
And then it's just God, one thing after another. I did this for you, it was grace, 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 as opposed to that human instinct of like, nope, I bring a lot. Trust me, God, I bring a lot to the table, and this is what I'm going to do for you. And God's like, nope, I'm going to serve you in this way. I'm going to build your house, your dynasty.
Well, if you look at verse 9 and 10, you know, I have been with you wherever you've gone, and I've destroyed all your enemies before you. I will make a great name for you like the other greatest on the earth. But it says, I will designate a place for my people Israel and plant them so they may live there and not be disturbed again. Evildoers will not continue to oppress them as they have done ever since the day I ordered judges to be over my people. And I will give you rest from all your enemies. The only time that's ever going to happen is in Revelation.
Yeah.
The only time that's ever going to happen is when we get to when the New Jerusalem comes down, And there is no need for a temple anymore because Christ will be there. That's the only time that this promise will ever be seen, or has yet to be seen, or will be seen. It never will have happened to what we call Israel here, God's chosen people. Ooh, I sounded so chosen people. That's rough. But God's people that love Him, that chose Him freely.
No.
But that's my point
Yeah.
here.
Isn't this
This is the rejuvenated Eden that we're all going to live in. This is the ultimate redemption God's bringing us. And you're going to see almost a pattern of that as they have already gone through the wilderness, and as they go to the promised land, which they're in Jerusalem, and they're going to be broken apart and come back again. It's never going to happen. And it hasn't
Wait a
happened
minute. You're
yet.
saying I can't take
No
this
matter
verse
how
and
many-
apply it to Israel, Gaza today?
No, and you can't to the new Israel, which is of course America.
Right.
That we're not going to be the Christian.
Yeah.
We're not going to be that nation of Yahweh, that nation of the true Messiah. We are never going to be that. There's only one thing that can do, and that's when God brings down the New Jerusalem, and Christ will be ultimately our Son and be our existence.
isn't this what Isaiah is promising in Isaiah chapter 11 when he talks about the righteous branch? There shall come forth from the shoot, from the stump of Jesse, a branch from its roots shall bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, Spirit of counsel and might, Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears see, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, decide with equity for the meek of the earth, and he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat. I mean, isn't this what Eden was supposed to be like?
What chapter was that again?
11.
Isaiah?
Isaiah chapter
Yeah.
11, verses 1 through 11.
Yeah.
1 through 11.
Yeah.
And that, isn't this what redemption looks like? Because if you study the kings of Judah that come from David, none of them meet this. At times they look a little bit like this.
Right.
Either they start well and end bad, or they started bad and end better. But none of them look like this. So this reality cannot be fulfilled in what we have seen through the line of David so far. So there's got to be something coming, someone coming from this line that's going to make this happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, yeah.
And the Tanakh has already talked about the Mashiach, the Messiah, but not in the terms of a person. We've seen references to it with people being smeared with oil, and we won't go through all that today. But I think, Wally, that's exactly what I see in this passage is this future redemption that's coming for his people, and it's not going to come through the line of David when he makes his name great. The name he's going to make great is the suffering servant of the Messiah, the one that was ultimately smeared with the job of being our salvation. And so I think this is all foreshadowing. If this was a good novel, this is the foreshadowing of, well, how this will be. This will never be. Well, it's because you can't, and Messiah will be coming. And what does this Messiah look like? Is he going to be like the name that's going to be like the other gods? No, he will not. Ultimately, he will, but he will not look like that at all. And this is where the Israelites get it wrong. And this is where we get
totally
the Christian nationalism, Yahweh nationalism.
And
we see
we've
in the
talked
New
about
Testament.
this a lot earlier when we talked in Genesis about how so much of this is taking what happened in the surrounding area and showing a contrast with how this God, this Yahweh, is different than all these territorial little g gods. And the thing that really sticks out to me here is you have David coming to God with the roadmap of what all the countries around them do for their deities. David comes to his God and says, this is what I'm going to do for you. And God saying, actually, no, you're never the giver. I'm always the giver. I'm the one that's going to serve you. And I think when we get that reversed, we do exactly what David, whether intentionally or unintentionally was trying to do. We bring the world, we bring politics into our platform with faith. And that, as we talked about earlier, is never a good thing.
And as we think about making your name great, I think I go back to Paul in Philippians chapter 2. How did Jesus make his name great? By being self-sacrificial.
Yeah.
Not
power over.
No, but I'm giving up my rights as God to be able to meet your needs where you are. And because he was willing to do that, God says, I'm making your name's going to be great in the heavens above, on earth, and under the earth. I mean, we see the three-tier cosmology of
Right.
Israelites at that point in time, that this name that Jesus has is going to be above every name. It's every knee shall bow on earth and under the earth, and every tongue shall confess. I'll get it out, that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
Yeah.
I mean, that his name is going to be great because not because of his power or might or status as God, but because he was willing to sacrifice himself for the good of others.
Yeah. And you look at our hearts are still for a king, but we still substitute the right kind of king with the wrong kind of king. We still want a person that feels powerful to us and that it's dominating and power over. And I think this passage shows a different kingdom, and it shows a different type of king, a king that serves his people, and a kingdom that is totally orchestrated by one side. It's by the Father. You know, sometimes you'll hear Christians talk about like we're bringing the kingdom of God, and that language is actually never found in the Bible. I've actually had to correct myself and go, no, that's not right. We receive the kingdom, and even in the Lord's Prayer, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We can pray for the kingdom to come, but we don't bring the kingdom. And my whole point is that when we try and we think we're the ones that bring the kingdom, that's when power and all those other things that we talked about earlier get mixed in, and it's not pretty.
I had a psalm that I was going to say. There it is, Psalm 146. "Do not trust in nobles, and a son of man who cannot save. When his breath leaves him, he returns to the ground, and on that day his plans die. Happy is the one whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is the Lord his God, the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever." And it goes on and lists the whole, frees the prisoners and blind and helping the humble and the fatherless and the widow. And that is what we should put our trust in, is the people around us. And what would Christ do for those people? And I don't know if it's going to be an apologistic approach. I think it's just going to be based in love and truth and justice, but truth and love.
That's our politics. What you just described is that is to be the follower of Christ. That is the kingdom of God is the picture of our politics, which should look not like anything else in our country right now. So, well, thank you guys. We actually kind of went pretty deep in a lot of ways on that one. And there's so much more that we could have done, but this really sets us up for next time. We're going to be in Jeremiah next time. Really excited about that one as well. Hope this has been good. Have a great week, everyone, and we will see you next time.